Everyone in that market laughed when a poor little girl gave her only coat to a freezing boy. No one knew the boy was the son of the city's most powerful billionaire. No one knew that the girl's kindness would expose a secret buried for 6 years. A secret that would break a father, redeem a sinner, and rewrite the meaning of love. But when the billionaire arrived, with guns, guards, and grief in his eyes, he didn't just find the girl who saved his son, he found the daughter he never knew existed. Before we dive into today's emotional story, I want to know, where are you watching me from right now? And what's the time there? Drop it in the comments below. I love seeing how far our family reaches. Snow fell like soft ashes from a tired sky, blanketing the crowded streets of New York in a trembling white silence. Amid the honking cars and rushing footsteps, a little girl with tangled golden hair and torn blue dress wandered through the market, clutching a small basket of flowers that nobody wanted to buy. Her name was Lila Grace, 6 years old, eyes as blue as the winter dusk, and yet her smile carried a warmth that could melt frost itself. Her shoes were mismatched, her hands red from cold, but she kept humming softly, a tune her late mother used to sing whenever they didn't have dinner. As she turned a corner, she saw something that made her pause. A small boy about her age, sitting on the stone steps near a fruit stand. His face was pale, his lips trembling, his fingers stiff as he tried to rub warmth into them. People walked past him, their fur coats brushing against his shoulders, but no one stopped. Vendors shouted prices, laughter echoed, but nobody noticed the boy shaking violently in the biting wind. Lila's little heart squeezed. She placed her basket down, walked toward him, and knelt in front of him. "Are you okay?" she asked softly, her breath forming clouds in the frozen air. The boy didn't answer. His eyes were glazed, frightened, and lost. Lila pulled out a small piece of bread she'd saved for herself, her only meal of the day, and held it out. "Here, eat," she whispered. He stared at it, hesitant, but hunger won over pride. He took it with trembling hands. Lila smiled faintly, watching him chew slowly. "It's not much, but it's warm," she said. The vendors nearby chuckled, some shaking their heads. "Look at that little beggar girl sharing her crumbs," one man sneered. "She can barely feed herself." Another laughed. "Maybe she thinks she's saving the world." Lila ignored them. She looked at the boy's bare hands, purple from the cold, and without thinking twice, she took off her small blue coat, the only one she owned, and wrapped it gently around his shoulders. "This will help," she said. The boy looked up, eyes wide. "But you'll be cold." Lila smiled, brushing a lock of hair from his face. "Mommy says, when you help someone, God helps you back." He looked at her like he'd never heard those words before. Somewhere deep in his memory, kindness flickered like a forgotten candle. Snowflakes landed softly on Lila's golden hair as she sat beside him, rubbing his hands to keep him warm. "What's your name?" she asked. "Ethan," he murmured faintly. "I can't find my car. My daddy's coming." Lila nodded. "Don't worry, we'll wait together." The laughter around them continued, cruel and cold. But Lila's world was small, just her and this boy who needed warmth. Minutes passed, and Ethan's breathing steadied. But from afar, panic began to ripple through the city. Guards in black coats ran between cars, shouting through radios. "He was here! Search every block!" one barked. Lila didn't know that Ethan wasn't just any boy. He was the son of Alexander Blackwood, one of the richest and most feared men in the country. His disappearance had turned the entire city upside down. Sirens began to wail in the distance, flashing red against the falling snow. Lila grew nervous as the sound grew closer. "They're looking for you?" she asked. Ethan nodded, frightened. "My dad gets mad when I get lost." Lila grabbed his hand. "Then we should hide until they stop yelling." She gently pulled him toward a nearby bakery whose kind owner often let her stand by the oven to stay warm. Inside, the air smelled of cinnamon and bread, and the boy's eyes softened. She led him to the back room, found a small blanket, and tucked him in near the fire. "See? Better now," she whispered. Ethan's eyes fluttered closed for a moment as he whispered, "Thank you." Lila leaned against the oven, watching the snow through the window. She didn't know that outside, chaos was unraveling. Dozens of security men were flooding the market, showing a photograph of the boy. Vendors shouted that they'd seen him with a little poor girl. The cruel laughter from before turned to nervous murmurs. Lila heard heavy footsteps approaching, voices shouting orders. Her heart began to pound. She peeked through the crack in the bakery door and saw a long line of black SUVs screeching to a stop outside. Men in suits stepping out with guns under their coats. One of them spoke into an earpiece. "Sir, we found the location." The bakery owner froze, looking toward Lila in confusion. "What's going on, child?" he whispered. "I don't know," she said softly, hugging herself. Outside, the snow glowed under the flashing red lights. The sound of car doors slamming echoed like thunder. Then came a deep, commanding voice that silenced the entire street. "Find my son!" the voice roared, sharp as fire in the cold air. The crowd parted in fear as a tall man stepped out of the car, his black coat billowing, his eyes glacial blue, his presence suffocating. Everyone whispered his name in terror: Alexander Blackwood. The air outside the bakery thickened with tension as the sound of boots striking the frozen ground echoed through the narrow street. People pressed themselves against walls as a tall man emerged from the largest black SUV, his shadow stretching long and cold under the flickering streetlight. Alexander Blackwood, the name that made even the toughest men lower their eyes, stepped forward with the fury of a storm wrapped in a tailored coat. His gaze swept the marketplace like a blade. No one dared breathe. His jaw was clenched tight, his blue eyes burning with a rage that came from fear disguised as power. He barked orders into his earpiece. "Seal the exits. Check every shop. No one leaves until I find my son." His guards scattered instantly, black figures blending into the white storm. The market fell silent, save for the crunch of snow beneath expensive shoes. Inside the bakery, Lila's tiny hands trembled as she clutched Ethan's arm. She could feel his heartbeat racing as fast as hers. That's my dad," Ethan whispered, his voice cracking between terror and relief. Lila swallowed hard, unsure if she should hide or reveal him. The bakery owner motioned for her to stay quiet, but curiosity pulled her toward the door. Through the fogged glass, she saw Alexander, a man who looked like he could command heaven itself. His eyes scanned the crowd with sharp precision, his anger visible in every controlled breath. "Sir," a guard called, "a witness says the boy was seen near the bakery." Alexander's head snapped toward the door. Without hesitation, he drew the gun from his coat, a sleek black weapon that caught the light like frozen steel, and stormed forward. Lila gasped, instinctively stepping in front of Ethan. The door burst open, wind and snow rushing in with the force of his entrance. The bakery owner froze in terror as Alexander's voice thundered, "Where is my son?" He swept the room with his gun aimed high, his coat whipping behind him like wings of darkness. His presence filled the room with suffocating power. When his eyes fell on Lila, standing barefoot in her torn blue dress, with the boy clinging to her side, he stopped. "Step away from him," he ordered. Lila's voice shook, but her spirit didn't. "No." The word was small, but it carried something pure, something that startled even him. The guards behind Alexander raised their guns, waiting for a command. Ethan broke free from Lila's grasp and ran to her front, shouting, "Don't hurt her, Daddy!" "She saved me." His voice cracked with emotion, echoing through the bakery like a plea from a child to a god. The billionaire froze, confusion flickering across his face. His hands trembled slightly as he lowered the barrel toward the ground. The girl's defiance burned brighter than his anger. She was trembling, yes, but her eyes, those ocean blue eyes, met his with a strange familiarity, something that pierced deeper than logic. The bakery owner stammered, "Sir, please. She's just a poor child. She didn't mean harm." Alexander ignored him, his focus fixed entirely on the girl. "You touched my son?" His tone wasn't of accusation now, but disbelief. Lila nodded, her small voice breaking. "He was cold. Nobody helped him." The man's breath caught. For a moment, the sound of the storm outside seemed to fade, replaced by the faint rhythm of his heart, remembering what mercy once felt like. His guards looked uncertain, exchanging glances, waiting for their master's next word. The girl's kindness disarmed him more than any weapon could. He holstered his gun slowly, the metal clicking against his coat. "You," he began, his voice softer. trembling slightly. You gave him your coat? Lila looked down, her bare shoulders red from the cold. He needed it more than me, she whispered. Ethan tugged at his father's sleeve. She helped me, Daddy. Don't be mad. The billionaire's eyes softened for a fleeting second, the storm behind them shifting into something wounded. He took a hesitant step forward, lowering himself to the child's level. For the first time in years, he didn't speak as a CEO or a king of crime. He spoke as a man trying to remember what love sounded like. Why would you help him? He asked, genuinely puzzled. Lila blinked, confused by the question. Because no one else did. Around them, the guards lowered their weapons, the crowd outside watching through the frosted windows in stunned silence. It was as if the city itself had paused to witness something rare. Innocence confronting power. The man who had commanded armies of men was speechless before a 6-year-old's kindness. He reached out a trembling hand, brushing the snow from her hair, his voice barely a whisper now, laced with awe and guilt. Who are you, little one? Before Lila could answer, a radio crackled behind him. Sir, we've got a situation at the north side. Someone's targeting your son. Alexander's expression turned from confusion to deadly focus, his eyes snapping toward the street as he barked, Lock down the area, now! The sound of sirens faded as the convoy of armored cars rolled away from the frozen market, leaving behind whispers and stunned silence. Inside the largest black SUV, Alexander Blackwood sat beside his son Ethan, who leaned sleepily against his chest, wrapped in a thick blanket. Across from them, little Lila Grace stared wide-eyed out the tinted window, her small fingers pressed against the glass as the city lights streaked by like golden rain. She had never been in a car so big, so silent that even her breathing sounded too loud. Alexander's usually cold face was unreadable. Anger had long since drained into exhaustion. Every time his gaze flickered toward the girl, something in him tightened, a ghost of familiarity he couldn't name. He cleared his throat. What's your name again? He asked quietly. Lila, she answered softly. Lila Grace. Her voice was polite, innocent, yet it carried a strange strength for someone so small. The driver glanced in the mirror, hesitant to speak but too curious to stay silent. Sir, are we heading home? Alexander hesitated before nodding. Yes, take us to the mansion. The convoy weaved through the snowy streets until the cars pulled into a long driveway, lined with glowing lanterns and tall pine trees dusted in silver frost. When the gates opened, Lila's eyes widened. The mansion rose like a palace from a dream, its grand pillars lit by golden light, windows shimmering like stars. Ethan grinned and tugged her hand. Come on, you'll like it here. Guards opened the doors, bowing slightly as Alexander stepped out, his coat flowing behind him. Lila hesitated, clutching her torn dress nervously. A gentle voice came from behind her. A woman in a warm gray coat approached with concern. Lila! The little girl turned and smiled. Miss Maria. It was her guardian, the kind-hearted waitress who had raised her since her mother's passing. She had rushed to the mansion after Alexander's men found her name in Lila's worn notebook. Alexander's cold gaze softened slightly as Maria reached them, out of breath. Sir, thank you for bringing her back safely. He nodded curtly. She did more than that. She saved my son. The words carried weight. Gratitude sounded strange in his voice, as though his tongue wasn't used to shaping it. Lila looked around the marble hall that glittered with chandeliers, her reflection multiplying in the polished floor. The house smelled of cinnamon and wood polish, warmth she hadn't felt in years. Is this where you live? She whispered to Ethan. He laughed. Yeah, it's boring though. My dad works all the time. Lila smiled faintly, her eyes tracing every golden frame and every flickering candle. You're lucky, she said softly. You have him. Ethan tilted his head. Don't you have a dad? Lila looked down. Mom said he left before I was born. The words pierced Alexander like a whisper through armor. His hand froze around the glass of wine the butler had just offered. He looked at the child's reflection in the mirror across the room, her golden hair glowing in the chandelier's light, those haunting blue eyes he couldn't stop remembering. Something deep inside him trembled, a soundless echo from a past he had buried beneath money and marble. Maria watched him carefully. She had seen men with power, but never one whose silence screamed this loud. "You've been very kind to us," she said cautiously, "but maybe we should go." "This place isn't for people like us," Alexander turned, his tone firm but not cold. "You'll stay tonight." The storm hasn't eased. He motioned for the butler to prepare the guest wing. Lila and Ethan ran up the grand staircase, their laughter bouncing off the high ceilings. For a fleeting moment, Alexander felt something in his chest, like the sound of a heartbeat returning after years of stillness. As he walked toward his study, the echo of Lila's words followed him down the hall. "You're lucky. Your dad loves you," he muttered under his breath. "I didn't even love myself." He poured another glass of wine but didn't drink it. Instead, he walked toward the mahogany bookshelf, pulling open a hidden drawer where he kept pieces of a life he'd tried to forget. Letters, photographs, shadows of mistakes. He flipped through the yellowed papers absent-mindedly until his hand froze. There between two files was a photograph, one he hadn't seen in years. It showed a young woman smiling under the same winter sky, her arms wrapped around a tiny baby with golden hair. His pulse quickened. The edges of the photo trembled in his grip. The room seemed to grow smaller, air thinning as realization brushed against the corner of his mind like a ghost whispering his name. He sank into the chair, the firelight reflecting in his stunned eyes as he traced the outline of the baby's face. It couldn't be, yet his heart refused to believe otherwise. The same blue eyes, the same golden strands. A truth he had never wanted to face was beginning to surface, crawling through the silence like a secret too heavy for the night to hold. Alexander's breath hitched as he turned the photo toward the light, his voice barely audible. "Rachel, why does she look exactly like you?" The night stretched its velvet silence across the Blackwood mansion, broken only by the distant hum of rain tapping against the tall glass windows. Alexander sat in his private study, the glow of amber firelight licking the edges of the room, throwing golden shadow across his chiseled face. The billionaire, once feared by boardrooms and competitors alike, now looked like a man carrying invisible chains. Down the long marble hallway, laughter echoed. Lila's laughter, light and innocent, chasing butterflies in the garden with Ethan under Maria's watchful gaze. That sound, pure, unbothered by wealth or sorrow, crept into Alexander's chest like a forgotten melody. When Maria entered the room later that evening, her presence brought warmth where wealth had brought only emptiness. Her brown eyes carried a quiet strength, her voice soft but firm. "You look like a man who hasn't slept in years." Alexander gave a faint smirk, swirling the whiskey in his glass. "Sleep," he murmured. "I stopped believing in peace when I learned money could buy everything but forgiveness." Maria didn't flinch. She walked closer, her tone tender but sharp enough to pierce pride. "Maybe forgiveness isn't for sale, Mr. Blackwood. Maybe it's earned by being human again." Her words hung between them, a challenge, a cure. Alexander looked at her with something foreign in his eyes. Vulnerability. "You talk as if you've known pain," he whispered. She looked away, her fingers tracing the edge of a photo frame on his desk. "I do. Pain teaches us to listen to the heart, not the world." For a long moment, silence danced around them, filled with unspoken emotions, old regrets, and the faint sound of rain. Later that night, when the children were asleep, Maria found him sitting by the fireplace. The flames painted him in shades of regret, his eyes glimmering with ghosts of the past. He spoke without looking up. "For years I bought everything, houses, cars, companies, even happiness. But I forgot how to live." She stood beside him, the firelight caressing her kind face. "Then start living," she said softly, "for the people who remind you of love." The words hit him like a promise he didn't know he needed. He turned toward her, and for the first time in years, his face softened. Not the mask of a billionaire, but the expression of a man who was remembering what it meant to care. Their eyes met, and something shifted, an invisible bridge built between two broken souls. The moment was quiet yet louder than thunder. He wanted to thank her, but his pride held him back. She wanted to comfort him, but her heart trembled. They sat in silence, both aware that something sacred had begun to grow, something fragile, beautiful, and real. The next morning, Alexander watched Maria braid Lila's golden hair, her gentle hands weaving strands like memories. Lila giggled, saying, "Daddy, Maria says kind hearts make magic." Alexander smiled faintly, his throat tightening. That one word, "daddy," stabbed his conscience, awakening feelings he couldn't name. He turned away, walking to the window, where the morning light spilled across his desk, and for a moment his eyes landed on a forgotten envelope. A letter from his past, sealed years ago by the woman he once loved. Guilt gnawed at him as he picked it up, but before he could open it, a knock shattered the calm. One of his servants entered hesitantly, holding a brown folder close to his chest. "Sir," the servant said quietly, trembling under the weight of his words, "the DNA report you requested, it's ready." Alexander's hand froze midair, his pulse thundered, and the envelope slipped from his grasp as he whispered, "Dear God, what if I already know the truth?" The morning sun rose over the Blackwood estate, gilding the world in deceptive peace. But peace was a luxury Alexander Blackwood could never afford. Inside his private office, his trembling fingers hovered above the unopened DNA report. But before he could reveal the truth, the blaring of alarms shattered the stillness. Outside, chaos erupted, tires screeching, shouts echoing through the long marble corridors. His head snapped up just as one of his security men burst through the door. "Sir, ambush! They've hit the convoy!" The mask of a father vanished in an instant, replaced by the face of the man the underworld whispered about, the ghost of Manhattan. His blue eyes hardened like winter ice, his voice slicing through fear. "Lock down the mansion. Move the children to the safe wing. I'll handle this within seconds." The billionaire CEO transformed into the ruthless king of shadows. Black SUVs screeched through the gates, automatic rifles flashing beneath the harsh daylight. Alexander stepped out in his tailored black coat, his presence commanding silence amid chaos. Bullets sparked against steel, glass shattered, men shouted orders into radios. Yet he moved with calm precision, firing with deadly grace, protecting what was his. Maria, clutching Lila and Ethan in the distance, watched in horror as the man she thought was a savior became a storm. She had known he was powerful, but not this. The streets outside the mansion looked like a war zone, a ballet of fire and fury. Rivals screamed his name, cursing the empire he built in the shadows. Alexander cornered one of them, his gun pressed to the man's trembling face. "You dare touch my family?" His voice was ice. "You've chosen your grave." The man begged for mercy, but mercy had long been buried beneath Alexander's empire. A single shot cracked the air, echoing through the city's heart like thunder. Maria's gasp was swallowed by silence. When he turned, his hands still trembling, she looked at him with tears, fear, disbelief, heartbreak. "You said you wanted to live again," she whispered, her voice breaking. "But this isn't life. It's punishment." Her words hit him harder than any bullet. He opened his mouth to speak, but she stepped back, shaking her head. "I can't stay here," she murmured, her voice trembling. "Not with a man who fights monsters by becoming one." Then she turned, her footsteps fading down the hallway like the sound of something pure slipping away. The battlefield quieted, smoke rising like ghosts around him. His men regrouped, bowing their heads as their boss, once a legend, now just a man drenched in regret, stood alone. He looked at his blood-stained hands and felt the echo of his late father's voice. Power without heart is a curse. He walked back into the mansion, past trembling servants and frightened eyes, searching for something, anything to anchor his soul. In the hallway he found Lila, her small frame standing bravely beside Ethan, her blue eyes wide not with fear, but disappointment. She looked at him as if the world had just fallen apart. Her tiny voice broke the silence, cutting through all the noise of war and power. "Don't hurt people, Mr. Alex," she said, tears streaking her pale cheeks. "Mommy said, hurting others hurts us too." The words struck deeper than any wound he'd ever taken. His knees nearly buckled as he looked at the little girl, the one who gave her coat, her food, her kindness, and saw in her the one thing he'd lost long ago: innocence. Alexander's voice cracked as he whispered, "Who was your mother, Lila?" And her answer made his world stop. Snow fell like feathers from a silver sky, drifting through the air with a softness that could almost cleanse the sins of the world. Inside the Blackwood mansion, the fire crackled quietly, the warmth spilling across the cold marble floor as Alexander sat alone, staring into the flames as if they held the answers he'd spent his life running from. His reflection flickered in the glass. A man who had everything yet owned nothing of meaning. The memory of Lila's trembling voice haunted him, echoing in the hollow of his heart. "Mommy said hurting others hurts us too." It was the voice that broke the beast inside him. When the door creaked open behind him, he didn't turn immediately. He didn't need to. He already knew that gentle presence, that calm grace. Maria. Her steps were soft but sure as she entered, her eyes studying the man who had once terrified the city, but now looked more like a broken boy than a mafia king. "I shouldn't have come," she whispered, her voice trembling with conflict. "Then why did you?" he asked quietly, not looking up. She hesitated before answering. "Because forgiveness isn't just for you, it's for me too." He finally turned, his blue eyes glimmering under the dim firelight. The world outside had judged him by his power, his ruthlessness, his sins. But Maria looked past all that, seeing the flicker of goodness he had buried beneath the rubble of pride. "Maria," he said slowly, his voice raw, "I've done things no one should forgive. But you make me want to try." She walked closer, each step heavy with unspoken emotion. "You can't erase your past, Alexander," she said, "but you can choose what kind of man you'll be from now on." He rose from his chair, the fire painting his features in hues of remorse and longing. "You make me want to be a man my son could respect," he confessed, his voice trembling. Her lips curved into the faintest, saddest smile. "And a man that little girl believes in." The words hit him deeper than bullets, sinking into the softest corner of his heart. For a long moment, silence embraced them. The kind of silence that doesn't demand words, only presence. Then she reached out, her hand brushing against his. His breath caught. The world outside the tall glass windows was drowning in white, snow falling endlessly like hope reborn. The two stood there, hands intertwined, fire warming their skin as their hearts began to thaw. For a moment, Alexander wasn't a billionaire, a mafia leader, or a man haunted by guilt. He was simply human. "I don't deserve this peace," he whispered. Maria's fingers tightened around his. "Then earn it," she said softly. "For them." For her, he closed his eyes, leaning forward just enough that their foreheads almost touched, and the air between them filled with something fragile, beautiful, and real, a quiet promise of redemption. The snow outside thickened, swirling under the moonlight like a blessing. Ethan's laughter echoed faintly from upstairs, Lila's giggles chasing it, a sound that made Alexander smile without meaning to. Maria looked at him and saw for the first time, not the empire, not the wealth, but the man inside, the one capable of love. She whispered, "You still have time." And he replied, his voice trembling, "Maybe time is finally giving me you." They stood together as the clock ticked softly in the background, the sound blending with the rhythm of their hearts. But upstairs, destiny stirred quietly. In his private study, little Lila had wandered in, her small fingers tracing the edge of his desk. Curiosity glimmered in her wide blue eyes as she pulled open a drawer. Inside lay a velvet box, dust clinging to its corners. She opened it carefully and froze. There, lying under the glow of the desk lamp, was a delicate silver necklace with a heart-shaped pendant. Her tiny hand trembled as she lifted it, recognition striking like lightning through her chest. Lila whispered, her voice cracking, This was Mommy's necklace." And at that moment, Alexander stepped into the doorway, his face pale as death. The world seemed to stop spinning when Alexander stepped into the doorway, his breath catching as his eyes locked on the small, fragile girl clutching the silver heart-shaped necklace. The same necklace he once fastened around Rachel's neck the night he promised her forever. The firelight flickered across the room, painting his face in shock and disbelief. His voice trembled as he stepped forward, each word scraping out like broken glass. "Where Where did you get this, Lila? She blinked up at him, innocence glistening in her wide blue eyes. It was my mommy's, she whispered softly, her small hands tightening around the pendant as if it were the last piece of heaven she had left. She wore it every night before she went to heaven. The words struck him like bullets to the soul. His fingers shook as he reached out, slowly taking the necklace from her trembling hand. The cold metal burned against his palm like a living memory. He staggered backward, clutching the pendant as images began to flood his mind. Rachel laughing in the summer sunlight, her golden hair catching the wind. Rachel kissing him goodbye the day she left. Rachel's voice breaking when she said, "You've changed, Alex. Money is killing the man I loved." He had ignored her tears, drowned in his empire, too proud to chase her when she walked away. And now, this little girl. His heart began to pound, each beat echoing through the empty mansion like thunder. "What was your mother's name?" he asked, barely managing to keep his voice steady. Lila tilted her head, her soft curls brushing her cheeks. "Her name was Rachel," she said gently, smiling with pure innocence. The name shattered him. Time unraveled. The room seemed to tilt as he stumbled backward, the walls closing in. His breath turned shallow, his vision blurred with tears he hadn't shed in years. Rachel, the love he destroyed, the woman he never stopped dreaming of, the mother of this child, the very child who had given her coat away, who had saved his son, who had unknowingly saved him. He pressed the pendant to his lips, a sob escaping before he could hold it back. "Rachel," he whispered, his voice breaking, "you kept my world alive even after you left." Lila frowned, stepping closer. "Are you okay, Mr. Alex?" she asked softly. He dropped to his knees before her, his face twisted in anguish and awe. His shaking hand cupped her cheek, his thumb brushing away a tear that had escaped her bright eyes. Knelt beside him, pressing a cloth to his wound. "You're bleeding, Alex. Stay with us," she pleaded. He looked at her, dazed, his voice barely a whisper. "If I die tonight, tell her I loved her." Lila clung to his chest, shaking her head violently. "No, Daddy. You promised you'd never leave me again. You said you'd stay." Her words pierced him deeper than any bullet. He took her face in his trembling hands, tears streaking his dirt-covered cheeks. "I'm not leaving, Angel. Not again. I'll fight until my last breath if it means keeping you safe." She sobbed harder, wrapping her small arms around his neck, refusing to let go. The medics moved in, checking his pulse, applying bandages, the flashing red and blue lights washing over their faces like a heartbeat of fate. Maria stood behind them, hands over her mouth, watching the man she once feared now broken and human, finally stripped of power and armor. When the gunfire ceased and silence claimed the room again, the reality hit her. Alexander Blackwood, the ruthless billionaire, the untouchable king of steel and shadow, had been brought to his knees not by bullets, but by love. The sirens faded, and the night breathed again, the snow falling softly over the ruins of glass and blood. As Alexander is carried into the ambulance, a shadow watches from the rooftops, Damon's sniper whispering into his earpiece. Phase 2 begins at dawn. The seasons had changed, but the memories still burned in Alexander's heart like eternal fire, reminding him of who he used to be and who he had become. Months after the attack, his mansion, once a cold fortress of marble and silence, now echoed with laughter, tiny footsteps, and the hopeful chatter of children who had known hunger, pain, and loneliness. The grand chandeliers sparkled above rows of bright faces, not of guests or billionaires, but of orphans. Each child wrapped in warmth, safety, and love. The man who once ruled empires with fear now ruled hearts with kindness. The press called it the miracle home, but to Alexander it was simply redemption built from the pieces of his shattered past. As he walked through the long hallways decorated with drawings and toys, his hand gently brushed over a framed photograph. Rachel holding baby Lila, her smile soft and forgiving, her eyes whispering from another lifetime. "You found your way back." His chest tightened, but this time, not from guilt, rather from gratitude. Maria approached from the garden, her hands covered in soil after planting roses in Rachel's memory. You're still working? She teased softly, brushing a loose strand of hair from her cheek. Alexander turned, his blue eyes softer than ever. I used to build towers to reach the sky, he said quietly. But now, I build homes so no child ever sleeps cold. She smiled, the same smile that once melted his rage, and placed her hand over his. Rachel would be proud, she whispered. He nodded, unable to speak, his throat tightening as he looked toward the entrance where Lila was playing with a group of children. Her golden hair caught the sunlight just like her mother's once had, her laughter bright and innocent, proof that even the coldest hearts could thaw. The mansion's courtyard was filled with people that day, volunteers, workers, and families who had been touched by Alexander's new mission. A stage had been built near the fountain, and as the crowd gathered, cameras clicked, reporters waited, and curious onlookers whispered about the billionaire who had changed. Alexander stepped forward, holding Lila's small hand. She looked up at him, her blue eyes wide and proud, as if she understood everything that had led to this day. He took a deep breath, his voice carrying through the quiet air. Once upon a time, he began, I believed money could buy happiness, that power could heal wounds, that I could silence the ghosts of my mistakes by burying them under gold. His words trembled with emotion. But a little girl in a torn blue dress proved me wrong. The audience grew still. Maria's eyes glistened with tears as Alexander continued. She gave away her only meal and her only coat to a freezing boy no one cared about. Everyone laughed at her, but I realized later, she was laughing with the angels. Because that one act of kindness didn't just save my son's life, it saved mine. The crowd erupted in gentle applause, but Alexander's eyes stayed on Lila. He knelt before her, emotion breaking through every wall he once had. That little girl taught me that the richest man in the world is poor if he has no kindness in his heart. His voice cracked, tears shimmering in his eyes. So today I dedicate this home, not to my name, not to my fortune, but to the woman who taught me love, and the little girl who reminded me what it means to feel. Lila squeezed his hand and whispered in her soft, angelic voice, Daddy, Mommy's watching, isn't she? Alexander nodded, his heart trembling. Yes, sweetheart. She never stopped. Snow began to fall. Gently, like heaven itself was listening. Maria joined them on stage, placing a comforting arm around his shoulder. The audience fell silent as the three stood together. A picture of healing, of second chances, of family reborn not by blood or money, but by compassion. Alexander looked toward the sky, his breath forming mist in the cold air, and said softly, Rachel, we're home now. Music swelled as children released white balloons into the sky, their laughter echoing through the courtyard. Each balloon carried a note, a wish, a prayer, a dream. Lila closed her eyes and whispered, Thank you, Mommy. I'm not alone anymore. The snowflakes sparkled as they touched her golden hair, and for a moment the wind carried a soft, tender warmth, almost like a kiss from heaven. Alexander wrapped his arms around her, Maria's hand resting gently over his, and the three of them stood together beneath the falling snow, surrounded by light, laughter, and the beautiful chaos of life reborn. The mansion, once built from pride and greed, now stood as a temple of love and forgiveness. The world outside could never understand the depth of what had changed inside him, but those who looked into his eyes saw it, the peace of a man who had finally forgiven himself. As the evening light painted the sky in gold, Alexander turned to Lila and said with a tearful smile, You were my second chance at life. She looked up, innocence glowing in her eyes, and whispered back, No, Daddy, you were mine. As the last snowflake landed on Lila's palm, she giggled, holding it up to the light. Mommy's still here, she said softly. Alexander smiled through tears, looking up at the endless white sky. The wind whispered through the trees. Kindness never dies. Fade out on their embrace, the world bathed in peace, love, and the miracle of a child's heart.